Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, it's my pleasure to speak to you this afternoon for the Friends of GDGI meeting and reflect with you a little bit on 2021, both on key things that happened in the world and key things that happened with GDGI. Clearly, the most significant event in 2021, certainly for GDGI, and I believe for many of you, was the Glasgow meeting, COP26, where the Glasgow Climate Pact was agreed. If you're like me, you'll have heard many signals about whether Glasgow was a failure or Glasgow was a success. From where I stand, it was neither a real triumph nor a real train wreck. There were some significant achievements made, some significant progress made, but on the other hand, some rather disappointing areas as well. GDGI was very active at COP26. We had worked with 29 of our member countries to prepare for COP, to prepare for more ambitious NDCs, to prepare low emission development strategies, and to work with a number of countries on preparation for Article 6. Much of that were the key things that were in the spotlight in Glasgow. In the end, for GDGI, it was a very successful COP. We were at many events and we were pleased that many of the member countries that we worked with were also represented in the events that we organized or where we spoke at. But of course, that was not the main event in Glasgow. That was the actual negotiations that led to the Glasgow Climate Pact. So was it or was it not a success? Certainly for the many people on the outside, for the demonstrators, Glasgow was a talk show. You'll all have heard the famous quote from Greta Thunberg that it was all blah, blah, blah. But even prominent observers like Professor Sir Robert Watson, a prominent environmental scientist and a former IPCC chair, called 2021 the year of rhetoric, not action, for climate. So where do we stand? I find this graph very helpful. In the little red line, business as usual, you see the path projected for emissions prior to the Paris Agreement. The NDCs that countries brought to Paris in 2015 bent the curve, but still would have led to increases in emissions rather than the drastic reductions that we need. You'll also see that the further reductions in the NDCs in 2021 brought to Paris bend the curve significantly more. So yes, you can say that is the success of the Paris Agreement to date, the distance between the red and the blue line and a quite different emission trajectory. But on the other hand, it's still quite far away from 1.5 degrees, the goal that we've all come to accept as the critical goal for climate. Probably the most optimistic projection was made by the International Energy Agency, IEA, during Glasgow, that if all the promises, all the pledges, including those not yet captured in NDCs, but the leaders' pledges, the net zero pledges, if all of those were implemented, we'd end up at about 1.8 degrees Celsius. Of course, that's not quite 1.5, but it is significant progress. So that hinges really directly on how credible those net zero pledges really are. I think it is clear that 2021 was the year of net zero. An idea that was only 2 years old, 2019, when IPCC came out with its 1.5 degree report and indicated that to stick with 1.5 degrees, emissions have to go down to zero, or at least net zero by 2050. That then led to a flurry of pledges. In the end, 136 countries, 115 regions, as you can see here, altogether covering 85% of the world population, 90% of GDP, and 88% of emissions. So such a rapid development of countries and organizations, companies signing up to this new idea of net zero in a time period of only 2 years is frankly nothing short of amazing. But is it for real? I've been asked that quite a few times, particularly by journalists in Korea that ask me, okay, net zero, is it realistic? And particularly Korea's quite strong 2030 NDC to reduce emissions by 2030 by 40%. Is it realistic? I say yes, we have the technology, it's feasible. It won't be easy, it won't be cheap, but it's feasible. In fact, the counter question is, will it be enough? IPCC has indicated that to achieve net zero by 2050, NDCs by 2030 should really reach for 45 to 50%. So frankly, no, it's not enough. And that is for Korea, with Japan one of the more leading countries in Asia now. Others are far behind. And in the coming years, I think the fight for climate will really focus on how rapidly Asia can power past coal, and whether Korea can lead the way through its own Green New Deal leadership, both in Korea and internationally. That will be a key question to ask, and hopefully we'll learn more in the elections in Korea in March. Certainly, GGI now has its Korea Green New Deal Fund, established by the Korean government at GGI, and we are ready to support our GGI members in the green transition and to accelerate climate action and to share Korean leadership. There are many other international cooperation opportunities now that Glasgow also concluded the rule book on Article 6 for internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, and GGI is working with quite a few countries to make that a reality as well. So that was Glasgow. Of course, GGI did more than show up in COP. We had actually a very good year. As you can see in this graph, GGI finances grew from some 40 to some $54 million last year, about a 25% growth. And given that we are expecting another 25% growth in 2022, that means GGI will have grown more than 100% in the 5 years from 2017 to 2022. Certainly that meant we had a very busy year. 2020, we still had our own financial crisis as a result of the pandemic. 2021 was a year of rapid expansion and of hiring a lot of people to implement the many new projects that we now have. In this graph, you can see that we had a growth spurt in terms of staffing in 2016-2017 when GGI grew from about 200 to about 300 staff. Then we stayed stable for a few years, grew a little bit, and this year we grew with another bit over 100 staff to more than 400 people in terms of staff, plus another bit more than 100 consultants. So together about 500 people working for GGI. And in 2022, we expect that growth to continue with another 70, 80 staff positions. So yes, we've grown rapidly in turnover and we have grown a lot in terms of staff. So what have we delivered? Well, 2021 also was an amazing year in terms of results for GGI. If you keep in mind that in terms of mobilizing green and climate finance for our members, we had gone from about nothing to about $2 billion by the end of 2020, and we added about $5 billion in a single year last year in green finance mobilized in 2021. That was dominated by support for Peru's first sustainable and first social bond, funded through a grant from the UK, and a number of other similar green bond issuances in Mexico, NAFIN, another $375 million, and a number of issuances that we are expecting in Vietnam shortly. So green bonds, green finance was really very, very big, really dominated our results, although we did many other things. As I already mentioned, we worked with about 29 countries on their climate action leading up to Glasgow, and that is only the tip of the iceberg of all our policy and planning work. We did also have a rather successful Green Growth Week late last year, still entirely virtual, but for the first time we opened our Green Growth Week up to external organizations. That meant that rather than having primarily internal GDGI speakers, we now had more than 250 speakers in some 36 sessions from over 100 partner organizations, about a third female, and about 2,500 registered online participants. We'll continue on this path and expect that this year the event will become even bigger as we hope to organize an in-person GDGI Assembly and Council meeting, and we'll combine that with a hybrid in-person and online Green Growth Week as well, leading up to the next COP, COP27, that will be held in Egypt. In conclusion, 2021 was truly an excellent year for GDI on many fronts. We also had, we had outstanding mobilization of green and climate finance, of course, dominated by the Peru sustainable and social bonds. We also had very good resource mobilization for GDI itself. Another year, a second year in which we signed about $60 million worth of new earmarked resource contracts. And that means we are set for another year of rapid growth in 2022. We're expecting another 25% or so growth, up to a budget of about 72 million, recruitment of another 50, 60 new staff, and expansion into new countries as well. With the Korea Green New Deal Fund, GDGI now has a number of trust funds, still new to GDGI, even though it's a fairly standard instrument for other multilateral organizations. New for GDGI, and it enables us to have new forms of service to our members, from managing grant programs or on-granting on behalf of donors to issuing soft loans or reimbursable grants for our Greenpreneur programs, for example. We also have quite a significant portfolio of Article 6 related technical assistance, and therefore an ongoing conversation with some 15 to 20 buyer and seller countries. And we hope to translate that into an opportunity to establish a GDGI carbon transaction platform in 2022, serving all our members interested in carbon transactions as buyers or sellers. I hope you found that of interest. Let me conclude by wishing you a great start to the year, and may 2022 bring you much happiness, good health, and hopefully we'll see a glimmer of light at the end of the COVID-19 tunnel. I thank you.